Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm here to give you my review of the series premiere of The Last of Us on HBO Max. And I want to say first that I'm a huge fan of the first Last of Us video game. It was a game changer, to use a cliche. It broke new ground in the video game world. It reinvented the wheel to a certain extent. So I just loved that game. And I was very much looking forward to the series, and it's finally premiered on HBO Max. So we're going to talk about the first episode. Before I get into that, I'd just like to ask you to please give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, share the video around. That would really help me out. Okay, so here we go. As the episode starts, it's 1968, and we're watching two scientists being interviewed on TV as they're discussing possible natural infectious threats to mankind that might exist. And they talk about viruses and pathogens and fungus, interestingly, and how that might cause a threat to humanity under certain circumstances. One of which was if the Earth gets any warmer than it was in 1968, which it did. Anyway, we then cut to 2003, and Joel and his daughter Sarah wake up in their rooms and proceed to have breakfast before leaving for work and school, respectively. After school, Sarah takes a bus to a watch repair shop, seemingly to have a watch repaired for her dad's birthday, as the shopkeeper's wife abruptly closes the shop after some police cars go by, blaring their sirens, at which point Sarah goes to her neighbor's house to visit. While she's visiting, the neighbor's elderly mother, who's usually catatonic and doesn't move, begins to have what appear to be muscle spasms or little tics in her wheelchair when the only person in the room is Sarah and her back is to her because she's looking at something. She's looking at books, or no, movies on a shelf, DVDs. And the little tics or whatever subside, but not before the dog, the family dog, seems to notice that something's off with the old woman. As Sarah leaves to go home, she notices several jet fighters flying overhead. Upon returning home, she reads a magazine as a story on the TV news in the background talks about a rash of violent incidents across the city that have been taking place, and that it is thought might be connected to a new street drug. And at this point, we're seeing a lot of familiar things that we see in zombie movies and zombie TV shows because they always start to unfold this way. But of course, it is a zombie game, so you know that they're adapting, so that's par for the course. But anyway, the next thing that happens is Joel returns home and she gives him his birthday present of the repaired watch before they start to watch a movie, which she borrowed from the neighbor, during which she falls asleep. Joel's brother Tommy then calls to say that he needs to get bailed out of jail because he stepped in on behalf of a woman who was being attacked by some crazy person in a bar and got arrested. Sarah wakes up just after 2 a.m. to the sound of dogs barking and helicopters going overhead. She gets up and realizes that her father isn't home, and after putting on the TV, realizes that there's a state of emergency happening because she puts the TV on and the state emergency signal thing is on. She sees the neighbor's dog is loose and tries to take him home, but he won't go in the house, at which point, seeing that the house door is open, she goes in, seemingly to see if everything's okay, and soon finds her neighbor's husband on the floor, having been attacked by the old lady, who she finds eating the neighbor, and then has to flee as the old woman goes to attack her. At which point, Joel shows up in his truck, screeching his tires and telling her to get in the truck, after which the old woman comes running out to attack them, and he puts her down with a wrench to Sarah's horror. He, Sarah, and Tommy take off in the truck and wind up taking off across a field to get to the other side of the highway when they find that the highway is jammed as hell, where they run into the army. As they try to move her around a blockade, they run into more chaos, including commercial jets flying super low. Finding themselves in the middle of the city where there's utter chaos of people running like crazy in the street, they can't really go anywhere without running people over. And as they're trying to maneuver as best they can, a jet plane crashes behind them some distance away, but debris lands near them, causing them to crash. when it explodes. Joel and Sarah get separated from Tommy, and Sarah has an injured ankle. So Joel picks her up and they try to get away on foot, but they run into some folks who've been zombified and are chased and almost get caught, but the zombie gets shot by a soldier who orders them to stop. And it appears he's then ordered to kill them after he radios in to say that he's found two civilians. And he almost succeeds at killing them as Joel dives away while holding Sarah as the soldier shoots at him. But Tommy catches up with him and kills the soldier. But it appears that Sarah's been fatally wounded, and in fact, she dies in Joel's arms. We then cut to 20 years later. A child is shambling through the woods as helicopters fly over, and we see that Boston has been decimated. It's just torn down and dilapidated. When the child collapses right outside of a quarantine facility, they're taken inside by the soldiers there. We then find Joel, who is still wearing his watch, even though the face is shattered, working at a burn pit where they dispose of the bodies of the infected. And one of the bodies turns out to be the kid that had collapsed outside the facility. After work, he comes across what appears to be a public hanging of some people who'd left the quarantine zone without authorization. On his way to meet with a soldier to whom he sells some pills, who warns him about the Fireflies, who are a rabble-rousing organization of activists operating in the area. We then see a woman negotiating her way through a situation where some guy and his goons were sort of holding her hostage after she pressed them about selling a truck battery to someone else that they had promised to sell to her after she paid them for it, and then kept her money. But the negotiations, such as they are interrupted by an explosion that breaks through the wall, killing one of the people that was there holding her, causing her to take to the streets, where she is mistaken for one of the Fireflies who were blowing stuff up. Next, we find a girl chained to a radiator in a room where she's being held by the Fireflies, who seem to be observing her to see if she's going to turn into a zombie. We learn that Tommy is missing, and when Joel asks the local radio operator, who's been listening to hear news of Tommy and other news, the location of the guard tower that the guy communicates with, seemingly because he wants to go out there looking for Tommy. The radio guy tells him that it's not just a bad idea because there are zombies out there, but because there are worse things than the zombies out there, including raiders and even slavers. But Joel insists, and he tells him where the tower is anyway. Joel then goes to his home to grab supplies. Afterwards, he takes a nap, and we see that the woman who was mistaken for a Firefly but then got released, Tess, lives with him. It seems that Joel wanted the battery for his truck so that he could go find Tommy, and Tess agrees to work with him to make sure that they, in fact, get the battery from whoever it was sold to. We then see that the Fireflies have a plan for the girl, whom one of the Firefly leaders goes in to unlock from the radiator, and we learn that her name is Ellie, despite the fact that she had told the Fireflies her name was Veronica, and we learn that she's an orphan. Joel and Tess take to the sewers to try to get to a particular building undetected so that they can ambush the guy who has their battery, which hasn't yet been taken to the buyer. And they come across a room where someone's been like fused to the wall, after which they somehow died standing up and began sprouting mushrooms which cover part of the wall. It was really creepy and very reminiscent of the game. As they're making their way through the building, they smell gunpowder and find a hallway full of bodies, one of which is the guy who sold the battery twice. And they find that the battery is also there, but that it's corroded and it's no good even. It turned out that the building is the Firefly headquarters where Ellie is being held. It would seem there was a shootout over the battery, which of course is attracting the authorities. And the Firefly leader, with whom Joel and Tess are familiar, tries to talk Joel and Tess into taking Ellie where she needs to go, because they're wounded and they won't be able to do it. And so Tess and Joel agree to do it, but they also say that they'll just straight up kill Ellie if they don't get what they want when they get to where she's supposed to go, to where the Fireflies wanted to take her. Before embarking on their journey, they go back home to make a plan and rest, at which point Ellie remarks to Joel that his watch is broken and that he mumbles in his sleep. He asks Ellie why it's so important that she get where she's going, but she doesn't tell him what Marlene, the Firefly leader, told her, which is, of course, that she seems to be immune to the infection. They then embark on said journey, which involves traveling underground to get outside the wall, after which they come up from underground and begin sneaking through what looks like a junkyard at night as helicopters and searchlights are about. And they come across the soldier that Joel was dealing with earlier, and Joel tries to negotiate with him to not turn them in, but Ellie catches him off guard and surprises him with a knife that she owns and stabs him pretty good. As the soldier then holds his gun on Joel, Joel flashes back to the night that Sarah died, when he was also being drawn down on by a soldier. And then he rushes the soldier, tackles him, and punches him in the face and head until he dies, as Ellie looks on. Interestingly, without being horrified, which is in contrast to how Sarah reacted when she saw Joel take out the old lady with the wrench in the beginning of the episode. Tess then picks up the scanner that the soldier had been using to tell whether or not they were infected and discovers that Ellie is carrying the infection, and of course, immediately suspects that she's sick. But before they have any time to do anything about that, as Ellie swears that she's not sick, the three of them take off running, and we see another shot of devastated downtown Boston, this time at night, while zombie growls can be heard in the background. And that's where the episode ends. So I really liked this premiere episode. I think they did a really good job, not only of, setting up this universe and telling this story about this, zombie apocalypse, but in adapting the game. The beginning segment that in short order leads up to Sarah's death is very reminiscent of the game, because of course that's what happens in the beginning of the first game. Things start out somewhat normal, family stuff, and then all hell breaks loose and Ellie dies. After which they do jump to the future and the world is torn asunder, as it were, and the main events of the game begin. Joel is introduced to Ellie and, things go forward. So they really captured that whole thing very well, especially the part in the beginning with Sarah, because, you have to understand who she was to Joel, and you have to, see that him losing her was the worst thing that ever happened to him, because it's the total setup for his relationship with Ellie, just as it was in the game. And I think, the game did that very well, and the adaptation did it equally as well. So they really did honor the game in that way, the source material. They just did a really good job. And it was, hard to watch because if you've played the game, you know what's going to happen. You know Sarah's going to die. And just seeing her in those few minutes be such a good kid and a charming kid, and you see, how she and Joel love each other, knowing she's going to die. It was really kind of hard to watch, because you don't know that when you're first playing the game, but you do know it when you're watching the show if you've played the game. So it was very hard to watch. And, I think it might be somewhat hard to watch the series going forward, knowing what happens to Joel in the beginning of the second game, which, spoiler alert, if you haven't played it, is that he's killed. So that's going to be kind of tricky too, because that's coming as well. It probably won't be in the show, certainly not for a long time, depending on how long the show runs. But yeah, that's coming as well. Anyway, as a series premiere, like I said, I think they did a good job setting everything up, establishing the conditions of the world, which are such that you have the sort of government, the military, in charge of these quarantine zones, which are where people who've yet to be infected live under, military rule, basically. And you have the fireflies, who are trying to, for some reason, get out from under the military rule, which they view as oppression. And so they set that all up very well. One thing I didn't really get is how the citizens are so free to move around in these quarantine zones, even to the point where, like, Joel has a gun. And to be fair, it's like, I think it's one of the things he dug up from under the floorboards when he went home to get supplies at one point. So it's not like, you can necessarily legally carry it in public, and, but where did he get it? How did he get it? If people aren't supposed to go outside the zone and they're not bringing people in without checking them out, through the quarantine facility, how did he get the gun? And, if people are escaping to outside the quarantine zone, then why are people even allowed to move around freely? Why isn't there like super strict martial law where people can't ever be on the streets? I didn't understand that. And how are there all these tunnels and stuff that the government doesn't know about? How is this headquarters of the Fireflies right there and they don't know that they're there. Like it's they're like, oh my god, the fireflies are going to attack. It's too bad we don't have any idea where they are, even though the city is walled off and they couldn't be. They're probably not coming in from outside. Like that didn't seem to make sense to me. But I guess if you get past that, it's just a really well done show. I've said this before and I'll say it again. I think it's a shame they didn't do this show more closely to when the game came out, because the character Ellie in the game looks exactly like Elliot Page used to look before their transition. And it would have been great if they could have had Ellie played by Elliot Page as he previously appeared, because it just would have been like the game coming to life. And I love Pedro Pascal. I wouldn't have cast him as Joel necessarily. Of course, the game, when you see Joel in the game, it sort of makes you think of Josh Brolin or his dad. So I would have liked to have seen one of them play it. But, Pedro Pascal, I'll take it. The funny thing about that is he starts off the show and he mentions that he's 36 and then it time jumps. And so he's supposed to be 56, but they didn't like age him at all. They just made his hair a tiny, tiny, tiny bit less brown. That's all they did. And in reality, Pedro Pascal's only like 47, so it's really kind of weird. But anyway, those are minor things. I think they set the show up perfectly, just about, aside from those minor things in this premiere. And I'm totally looking forward to it. I should say too, before I go, that I was a little bit disappointed that there wasn't much zombie stuff. Like we saw like the old lady, and then we saw the one guy that was chasing Joel and Sarah, but we didn't see any other like zombies. And I kind of wanted to see at least one in the premiere, you know, like totally like ravaged out zombie. We didn't really see that. The two that we saw were kind of just like, they looked normal, but they were eating people. I wanted to see kind of, one of the crazy looking zombies before the episode ended, but I don't know, maybe we'll get that in the second episode, which of course won't air for another week. Thanks, HBO Max. But yeah, anyway, that's my breakdown and review of the series premiere of The Last of Us on HBO Max. I'm looking forward to the season, and I, of course, will be back with a review of the next episode once it is released. For now, I'm going to get out of here. Before I go, I wish you peace and long life.